Happy to have you here if you're new. Welcome back if you're old. Today I'm going to be revealing a little secret. Over the years, I would say the most common question about the Scion would be, where did you get those headlights, or where did you get those fender flares? The headlights in particular are kind of easy to explain. They came from an unreputable source, and I don't really like to suggest it because I had to rebuild them again shortly after I purchased them. As far as the fender flares, I honestly can't count the amount of times I've been asked where they come from. But what I could remember is that I purchased them on eBay. Shout out to eBay. Please sponsor me. This project is going to be expensive. Anyways, I took the time out today to find the old eBay account after doing some digging. And it just so happens they're 240Z fender flares. Go figure. I don't know what Google dumpster dive I was on, but you're welcome. Now, if you look up these flares for just Scion, you'll find really small versions. 1 inch, 2 inch here, 1.5 inch there. It's not quite wide enough if you want to go for something that's a little out there. These ones in particular are 3 inch wide. And I think they fit perfectly around the arches that are already kind of preset on the Scion to be cut, if I'm being honest. I've seen a few other Scion owners follow suit with this fender flare trend back in, I want to say 2016, maybe 2015, and they just didn't quite pull it off. You have to go with the 3 inch. Go big or go home. These ones are perfect. Trust me. Today we'll be giving my setup a little refresh and touching on some rough edges, to say the least. This will be accompanied by the smooth nature sounds of the rainy weather that's been beating up Georgia for the past 2 weeks. Initially, I had planned to take off each fender, wipe it down, get all the crusties off. This front one just didn't want to come off, and I ended up going to the back fender flare. Little did I know, that's where more trouble was. RIP to past me. We got some work to do. If there's anything that I could teach past me or future you, is that you need to plan before you start cutting your car apart. Get some solid weatherproofing. This is the one I like. There's also other rubber options that you can just buy in a whole strip, but we're on a budget. Obviously get your fender flares, some solid nylon bolts. Those will lock your bolts in place, whichever ones you choose. A razor, and back to work. I already know I'm going to receive some judgment on this one, but listen, I was young, I was dumb. I didn't think about cars and how they rust and how cutting them apart makes them more vulnerable to that rust. I don't have the materials to clean this up right now, but I promise we're going to get back to it. You just make sure you do the right thing and spray those edges down with some protectant to avoid my mistakes repeating themselves. Janky metal car edges aside, the first set of troubles that I ran into was the fact that the old bolts, or rather their holes, were not big enough. So I started drilling away to try and fix that aspect of it. After quite a bit of drilling, I found out that the depth that these bolts actually needed to travel were much longer in the back than the front. To be honest, I got frustrated, and we'll have to come back to this whole rear end some other time. But for y'all, I wanted to go back and hit the front end with some love and attention that it very much needed. By the way, if y'all have any questions about how I do things, what bolts I use, what weather stripping product I use, or maybe even this hoodie that you see, I did take that picture, and I've never sold it to anyone. I just made one for myself. I'd be happy to sell it on here if you guys actually are interested. For now, let's go back to the front and address the issues up there. Trust me, it's much easier to get this project done in the front end of your car than the rear end of your car, at least with the Scion. There's a lot of metal body parts that are blocking you from accessing what you need to bolt down the fender flares properly. Just as we did previously with the rear flares, we're going to be drilling out the holes on the front end to make way for the new bolts. For the hardware, I decided to go with a 1/4 inch by 20 all the way around. With an Allen key, you can tighten up the front, and with a wrench, you can tighten up the back. To avoid the mistakes that I made in the rear, you'll likely need to go with at least a 2 inch, maybe a little bit longer, to avoid the metal frame of the car, plastic bits, and other miscellaneous things that sit within your wheel well and avoid you from doing reckless wide body shenanigans. Once you have those holes drilled out, you'll want to take your 11 wrench, drop your bolt inside of it, the correct way obviously. Stick that inside of your wheel well and line it up with the bolt. With these in particular, I try to catch it right on the very edge when it's in between the wheel well and the fender flare, and then bolt it in. I also added a little rubber grommet to clean up the look. If at all possible, I definitely recommend taking off your wheels before applying these fender flares. As you can see, I'm not the biggest guy in the world, but I can barely fit my hand back there to get the work done. So it's much easier if you have all the obstructions out of the way. We've come to my favorite part. Shout out to Nakai-san and his RWE Porsches. That's where I got this idea from. I mean, we're basically the same. He just has Porsche money, I have Scion money. We'll have to use the weather stripping, some electrical tape. You can use whatever tape you like. I think the electrical tape works best. It's a little more malleable. You'll want to line the inside and the outside of the space that you want to apply the weatherproofing. At this point, I had to acknowledge how dirty the car actually was and clean off the surface before I put tape on. Once you've cleaned off that surface, you're ready to get back to those smooth nature sounds that I was talking about earlier. Here you go. Don't say I never did anything for you. Now don't get me wrong, there's 1,000,001 ways to get this job done. I just think this way is the easiest and it's my personal favorite. So if you have some other methods, by all means, try them out. But this is just how I do it. It's a little hard to see on camera, but once you have your section outlined, all you have to do is drop the weatherproofing inside it and clean it up with either a finger or a sponge, whichever you prefer. Using your finger is definitely the messier method, but it's the preferred for me. It's important to take your time with this step. You don't want any smears or smudges in your weatherproofing. It's going to look a little wonky. You can see here, I kind of ran out of fingers, but you'll figure it out. If you notice I'm moving very gingerly, you don't want to have the weatherproofing that's on the tape fall back onto your bumper. It's a nightmare to get this stuff off once it's dried a little bit, which is why you want to get it clean and pulled as fast as possible. If you ever happen to find your way to Georgia and see my car rolling around, you'll probably notice this little boo-boo, we'll call it. It's the only part of my car that my dad ever damaged, and I felt like I should keep it there, in his memory. But just like any other corner of the car with the fender flares, it's the same process. Unscrew the old, install the new, plain and simple. It's a much more lengthy process to initially put the fender flares on with angle grinders and sanding, but all in all, that's all there is to it. I've probably mentioned this before in this video, no less, but if there's any other questions that you guys have for me, definitely let me know. I'll be happy to answer whatever. I know our car community is kind of going in a hole right now, but I'd be happy to help anybody who asks for it. I might get a little overwhelmed with the amount of questions, but I'll try to get to as many as I can. Enjoy the smooth sounds of Georgia's terrible weather conditions as I clean up and this video closes out. Happy to have you in another video. This is Jay. Thanks for watching, and stay cruising.